Well, as Congress negotiates the president's infrastructure as well as spending plans, Penn Wharton's out with its assessment of the economic impact of those programs. Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman here with a breakdown from that study. So, Rick, walk us through this. I mean, which programs are likely to generate the highest and lowest returns?
This interested me because Joe Biden's probably not going to get everything he's asking for. So let's say Congress were to say, you know what, we want to focus on the things that are going to be best for the economy overall. What would those things be? And I think most economists would agree that the top of the list are education programs. There's a lot of evidence showing that education does provide a pretty high return on investment, if you will, for federal money. So Biden has two big education programs. One of them is universal pre-K or preschool for all American kids, and that is shown to be really effective in terms of producing better students who turn out to be better workers and earn more money overall. The trick with that is you don't see the results for 15 or 20 years because it's preschool after all. So you don't get the results of that investment until these people are actually in the workforce. So there's a long payback period there. The other education program Biden has proposed is more college aid for lower income students, more free community college, more Pell Grants and more things like that. Also, probably a relatively good investment, and you'd get a much quicker return because those are students who are going to be going into the workforce in just a couple of years.
Rick, what about some of the climate initiatives? I mean, the president has laid out a pretty extensive list. He didn't necessarily get it all in at least the bipartisan bill, but we're talking about clean energy initiatives, additional investments in EVs, for example. How do you measure the return on something like that, to your point, when that's also not a short-term fix?
There are competing economic models on this, and I think the most honest answer is I just don't think we know whether this would actually produce a net gain to the U.S. economy. For one thing, we've never done an infrastructure program of this magnitude before. I guess you could point to the interstate highway system, but that was not replacing an existing system. That was building an entirely new system. And one thing we know about infrastructure is you get more bang for the buck when you're building brand new infrastructure than you do when you're replacing old or aging infrastructure or instituting new technology. So, I mean, I think you can make a very strong argument that we need to convert to clean energy across, throughout the economy, just for ecological reasons. I'm not so sure that that is going to produce, more than a one-for-one return on investment for the dollars, though. Infrastructure overall is also a little bit tricky. I mean, you do tend to get some new jobs in the beginning, and if you can make the economy more efficient, yes, that's good. But again, you get a lot more when you're building it the first time than when you're just going back and repairing or upgrading it. So perhaps a more modest investment there, but probably still a positive return on that money.
And of course, we're talking about this in the context of what's in the bill, not necessarily what's going to be passed. What's your sense on the timeline and basically how realistic it is to get a lot of these initiatives passed right now as things stand?
Yeah, well, there are really at least two things to watch here. One is the BIF, the BIF, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework. That was the agreement, the very tentative agreement, I should say, on something like $1.2 trillion in spending on traditional infrastructure. As you pointed out, that doesn't include any of Biden's clean energy programs. It includes none of the social welfare spending he wants to do. If that actually can get through Congress, it's going to be with the slimmest of margins, and it's going to be pretty tricky. But then it does seem likely that Democrats are going to follow that up with their own Democratic-only bill they'll pass with the procedure in the Senate that just requires a simple majority. And that's going to be the catch-all for everything else President Biden wants to pass. So we'll see if he can get some of it on a bipartisan basis. And if he does or doesn't, the Democrats are still going to try to get a lot of everything else on a Democrats-only basis.